Hello and welcome to Through the Big Book with Dr. Ben. My name is Ben and I'm an alcoholic. I just want to welcome you back. And if you've made it this far into the book with me, you're doing awesome. And I just want to say, I just want to give you a big shout out and say thanks for watching. And I never ask people to subscribe or to like or anything like that because I'm not trying to do this for any kind of notoriety or make money or anything like that. So this podcast is exclusively going to travel by word of mouth. So if it's helped you, I would just encourage you to tell somebody else about it. To help it reach as many people as it can in order to help them. But otherwise, this is and will always continue to be unpaid and all that stuff. It'll be as free as possible for forever. So, but I just want to just say thanks for coming today, and I really appreciate you. So in this one, we'll be in how it works. This will be part 2 of how it works. We're in the final paragraph of how it works. So today we'll be looking at a third step. It's very exciting. This is a big deal. This is a big deal step. It says the first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. On that basis, we're almost always in collision with something or somebody, even though our motives are good. Does that sound familiar to you? Most people try to live by self-propulsion. Each person's like an actor who wants to run the whole show and is forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery, and the rest of the players in his own way. If his arrangements would only stay put, if only people would do as he wished, the show would be great. Everybody, including himself, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful. In trying to make these arrangements, our actor may sometimes be quite virtuous. He may be kind, considerate, patient, and generous, even modest and self-sacrificing. On the other hand, he may be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. But as with most humans, he's more likely to have varied traits. So these are all kind of the results of us playing God, as you hear people say in our life. Playing God in our life or in others' lives, or in our kids' lives, our friends' lives, our sponsees' lives. Absolutely see plenty of that going on in AA. This is what it happens. We're always in collision with something or somebody. Why can't they just see that this is the way I want things to be? Everything's going to go great if we can do it my way. Don't you see? Don't you see my master plan? Well, then let's do it. But as we're seeing throughout, decades of experience, that's just not the way life works, right? So what usually happens if we do this playing God role? It says the show doesn't come off very well. He begins to think that life doesn't treat him right. He decides to exert himself more. He becomes gracious on the next occasion, still more demanding or gracious as the case may be. Still the play doesn't suit him. Admitting he may be somewhat at fault, he's sure that other people are more to blame. He becomes angry, indignant, and self-pitying. What is his basic trouble? Is he not really a self-seeker even when trying to be kind? Is he not a victim of the delusion that he can get satisfaction and happiness out of this world if he only manages well? Is it not evident to the rest of the players that these are the things he wants? And do not his actions make each of them wish to retaliate, snatching all they can get out of the show? Is he not, even in his best moments, a producer of confusion rather than harmony? So these are the results of playing God. This is what's going to happen whenever we're living by a self-will. They call it a self-will run riot or self-propulsion. Selfishness, basically, is what we're living by here. So it says our actor is self-centered and egocentric, as people like to call it nowadays. He's like the retired businessman who lolls in the Florida sunshine in the winter, complaining of the sad state of the nation. The minister who sighs over the sins of the 20th century, politicians and reformers who are sure that all would be utopia if the rest of the world would only behave. The outlaw safecracker who thinks society has wronged him, and the alcoholic who has lost all and is locked up. Whatever our protestations, are not most of us concerned with ourselves, our resentments, or our self-pity? So I think that paragraph is pretty straightforward. But these next several paragraphs are all, as we say in med school, high yield, which means it's just stuff you gotta know. These next several paragraphs is just, you can highlight the whole page. You can see on mine, this is just all highlighted. But we're really going to get into some meat and potatoes here in this episode, so I'm excited. All right, so let's get moving here. It says, selfishness, self-centeredness. That we think is the root of our troubles. So I'm going to pause right there and unpack on that for a minute. So the way I like to think about this as my disease of alcoholism is kind of like being a tree. On the leaves you have my, hurt relationships, or maybe a DUI, or whatever. These are, or the physical things, maybe I have high liver enzymes, or my skin is getting bad, or whatever, losing teeth because of drug use, something. Temper. Then you have the branches, the things that feed that, and then you have the trunk, which is, what holds the whole thing up, right? And then beneath that, beneath the surface, you have the roots. And what the roots do is they feed the entire tree, but you can't see them, right? You can't see the roots of a tree. You know they're there, but no one ever sees them. So what feeds our tree here of alcoholism is selfishness. Selfishness are the roots. Selfishness are all the different things that feed our selfishness, feed the tree or the disease of alcoholism. Isn't that intense? That was like, when I first read that, it was hard for me to really believe that selfishness was the root of my troubles. But that's what it's saying here, and that's what I believe today. So whenever you hear people say, I'm an alcoholic and an addict and a this and a that, it doesn't really matter. There's a joke that I've heard said, where if you identify as an alcoholic and an addict, you can put $2 in the bucket or the basket rather than one. It's kind of a joke. But now we're seeing that alcohol is not your problem. So if you say, well, I'm going to quit alcohol, but I can still smoke weed and take pills and do blow and gamble and cheat on my wife and all this stuff, because alcohol is my problem. All those other things aren't my problem. You're wrong. Your selfishness is your problem. My selfishness is my problem. You see, it's not alcohol. It's not the drugs. It's not the promiscuity or any of that stuff. It's my selfishness. That's what gets me in trouble. That is the whole root of this whole thing that we're talking about here of alcoholism, is our selfishness. So let's keep moving on here. It says, driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity, we step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. So this here is saying that selfishness is like the absolute root system. In fear, we talk about fear all the time in AA. And fear is like the water to our selfishness. Fear is like the water to our root system. Does that make sense? Because if I'm being selfish, let's say I don't want to lose something, or I'm afraid of losing something, or I'm afraid of not getting something I want. Those are the two most basic fears that most people have that are the most common. So and this is kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but if I'm afraid of losing something, it means that I think it's really mine in the first place, that I'm taking this extreme ownership or something over it. But everything comes and goes. Nothing is permanent. That's pretty obvious, right? It doesn't feel like that whenever we're actually analyzing our behavior, or prior to us analyzing our behavior. But we'll see that nothing's permanent. Everything comes, everything goes. That's just the way of life. Or another thing of being afraid of not getting something I want. Well, again, that's selfishness. That's not trusting. We'll say our God's abundance, or God's plan, however you want to say that, for our lives. And we're trying to claw things rather than being grateful for what we have and accepting what comes our way. Now, I'm not saying this has nothing to do with ambition and making a way for yourself or anything like that. I'll talk about that a lot as well. I think that ambition's great, but there's a way to go about things. So again, our fear is what's feeding selfishness. It's not a root cause. The selfishness is the root cause. Fear is feeding it. Okay. So, and also it says we step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. So we do that because we might be screwing people over or not showing up or things like that. It says sometimes they hurt us. Now this is very important too. Seemingly without provocation, but we invariably find at some time in the past we had made decisions based on self, which later placed us in a position to be hurt. Now that is gigantic. That means that whatever's happened to me throughout my whole life is a result of me being in a position to be harmed. Now, I think that there are occasions that are quite common that happen to people in their childhood that are a whole different topic, where they are taken advantage of by a family member or a relative, or something traumatic like that happens to them in their childhood. That's a whole nother topic for our fourth step, and we'll get to that. But by and large, pretty much every other topic, I put myself in a position to be hurt. It's not all their fault. They might have done something acting in self, but and hurt me. But I was there because I had something. I had something I thought I wanted out of it, and this includes relationships, all kinds of stuff, work. I mean, this is extremely pervasive, a very omnipotent kind of topic when it comes to human behavior. And what it really tells me, though, is that I have to lay down that victim card. I'm no longer a victim of life. What happens to me in my life is just part of what it's because I've put myself in a position to be there. Does that make sense? It says, so our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves. And the alcoholic is an extreme example of a self-will run riot. I think I messed that up. Self-will run riot. That's a tongue twister. It says, though he usually doesn't think so. Says above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. Why, you ask? Well, it says we must, or it kills us. That's pretty intense. That's the first time we've talked about death here. And how do I do that? Good question. It says God makes that possible. And there often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without his aid. Many of us had moral and philosophical convictions galore, but we couldn't live up to them even though we would have liked to. Neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our willpower. We had to have God's help. And so that's an explanation of, there's a whole lot of different forms, schools of thought. Just to name a few, there's like Confucius, there's like some of the things that Jesus laid down, and Buddha. There's self-help books galore. There are all kinds of things that we can try to model without asking for God's help, but it's just so much work. It's so hard to do without God's help. And so now we've came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. In step 2, we talked about that. And so now we're going to turn it over. We're going to ask for that help from God, from a concept of a higher power greater than ourselves. So that's what we're doing here. That's what we've been chipping away at. It says this is the how and the why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. And that all the selfishness stuff that we've been talking about for the last several paragraphs, that's all playing God. That's what we're referring to. It says it didn't work. Next, we decided, and that's the decision part of the third step, where it says made a decision. It says we decided that hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be our director. He is the principal. We are his agents. He is the Father, and we are his children. Most good ideas are simple, and this concept was the keystone of the new and triumphant arc through which we pass to freedom. So this really simplifies things, and I hope that you've kind of gotten over any kind of antagonistic thoughts you've had about a sexist God or any of that stuff, because this is an older book, and we're just gonna keep moving forward and calling God as a male prefix or whatever that's called, and call him God just from here on out, because that's what the book says, and whether or not that agrees with your precise concept is completely irrelevant. So moving forward, I'm just going to go by God and him and just use terminology that's used in the big book. Okay? So now this whole concept of the keystone, that's like the archway, through in the arch holds up all this weight. It's got some kind of architectural significance behind it, but it's kind of there to help us to visualize God taking this weight of the world up off of our shoulders, of having to run this show all by ourselves and try to change all by ourselves and do all this stuff all by ourselves and feel like we're all by ourselves, because we're not. With this, we see that we're no longer alone, that we have access to God at all times, that God is with us at all times, and that there is a plan far greater than anything that we could have conceived on our own or forced on our own. And so this is really a huge turning point, not only for the way I feel about delivering this podcast now to this moment, but also for, and more importantly, for you and the way that you get to go about your step work, because this is a big step. You've heard about the people talking about the third step all the time, and so this is what it is. We're diving into it here. So what happens if I take a third step, or the promises, if you will, or the results, if you're more logic based in your thinking? What are the results of me taking this third step? It says, when we sincerely took such a position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. Number one, we had a new employer. That's kind of neat. It says, being all-powerful, he provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. That's pretty awesome. Now, you'll hear all kinds of miraculous stories about God providing what people need from doing AA and doing what they perceive to be his will and his work in their life. I've heard all kinds of monetary things about checks showing up in the mail, from all kinds of stuff to babies being born whenever they probably shouldn't have been, and healthy and beautiful babies being born when they shouldn't have. People that are working this program. I mean, beautiful, miraculous things that everybody wants in their life, It's so beautiful. It's such a beautiful thing. I've witnessed this stuff. It's as true as anything I've ever seen in my life. It says, established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans and designs. It kind of cuts to the core there and calls us out for our ambitions, right? And for all the things that we think are so important. Our company, our next degree, getting more money, selling that thing, whatever your thing is, it's really not that big of a deal. Nobody is that big of a deal, we're now finding out. And to become so much less interested in yourself and more in God's work than my own has radically changed my life. It's just, I can't even begin to tell you how much it's done for my stress and anxiety, my depression, and not to mention the fact that I don't want to drink. It's just incredible. It says more and more we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life. That's kind of like this podcast. I'm doing this. I get to contribute my time and my experience to this podcast rather than, going out and working to make more money for myself or do something I want to do. I love playing video games, which is silly, I know. But I do. I like playing video games. I'm not playing video games. I'm doing this instead. I'm contributing to life. I'm contributing to the world because I believe that's God's plan for me today in this moment. So it says, as we felt new power flow in. Now that is big. Because remember that the first step was power. We're talking about powerlessness. We admitted that we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives become unmanageable. And so now this is saying that I'm going to feel power flow in. Maybe for the first time in a long time. Now obviously later on in steps 6 and 7 and 10 and 11 and 12, we're going to learn what to do with that power. But we will have power flow in, which is a new thing. It was a new thing for me. It says, as we enjoyed peace of mind, that means, less anxiety, less stress. As we discovered we could face life successfully, as we became conscious of His presence, and they're saying God's presence, that God's here with me now, and God's here with you right now, we began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, or the hereafter. So that means I'm not so worried about everything that I have to do today. I'm not so worried about making sure I'm at work, 4 minutes early or whatever it is. I'm not worried about my bills. I know that if I show up and do my work and I do God's work according to His plan, that I will be provided for. And the hereafter, that's a lot of different interpretations. That could be like the day after tomorrow. That could be like life after death. That could be a lot of different things. But for us, let's just say, the rest of the week. Excuse me. But hereafter is hereafter, from here on out. The most simple way to say it. So, it says, we were now at step 3. Many of us said to our Maker as we understood Him. Now at this point, I'm going to move this table a little bit. There we go. I'm going to get down on my knees, and I encourage you to get down on your knees with me. So I'll give you a second to do that. Make sure your big book's in front of you. All right. So now we read together what it says next. It says, God, I offer myself to Thee, to build with me and to do with me as Thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do Thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of Thy power, Thy love, and Thy way of life. May I do Thy will always. Oh. Isn't that beautiful? I just never get tired of that. That is a third step. And I tell you, congratulations. You just did a third step. That's a big deal. That's a huge deal. And if you came in here as an agnostic, blah, 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 it's a huge deal to hit your knees and surrender and to do that. That's a third step. That's it. There's nothing else to it. That's all there is. There's no working on a third step. There's no any of that. That's all it is. We just roll right through it. It says we thought well before taking this step, making sure we were ready, that we could at last abandon ourselves utterly to Him. We found it very desirable to take this spiritual step with an understanding person, such as our wife, best friend, or spiritual advisor, such as myself. But it is better to meet God alone than with one who might misunderstand. The wording was, of course, quite optional so long as we expressed the idea, voicing it without reservation. So that's saying that you can reword that prayer in any way you like, as long as you're humbling yourself before God and turning yourself, your will and your life over to God. It's all the same thing. I was encouraged to memorize that prayer. God, I offer myself to thee, that one, the third step prayer. That's called the third step prayer. And in so doing, it takes time because it's a very dated kind of language. But in so doing, number one, I'm praying, which is the first fruit, or which bears fruit, is the obvious. The second thing is that in order to learn this thing, I'm going to have to work through it. I'm going to have to say it over and over again, and I'm going to be thinking about something other than my little plans and designs, which has tremendous benefits, right? And then third of all, we say it all over, all around the world in AA. The meeting I go to is in New York City, and we'll say it on the third step. We have a third step Thursday, where we say it at the end of the meeting, and it's just something I have as like a tool on my belt. It's something you just got to have. Whenever I get kind of flustered or whatever, and I get all wound up in my little plans and designs and caught up in work and caught up in the moment and caught up in the stress of exams and finances and relationships and stuff, I go to the serenity prayer first. That's kind of my baseline prayer. And if you don't know it, it's God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. The second prayer I do right after that is I go into a third step prayer. And I just recite it. I say, God, I offer myself to thee, and recite that prayer. And that kind of gets me a little more grounded and remember that I'm not God. It's not my world. It's God's world. It's God's plan, design. It's not mine. I'm just simply here to show up and do the work, to do His work. And third, I do a 7-step prayer right after that, which we'll go through later on. But I would just encourage you to memorize it. I really would. I think it's really important for those reasons. But however, again, not necessary. It says, though this was only a beginning, this was only a beginning, though if honestly and humbly made, an effect, sometimes a very great one, was felt at once. I sure hope that that's the case for you. I'm sitting here in my living room today, and I'm feeling an effect. So thank you for the opportunity for me to share this with you. I hope that it's helpful to you. If it is, again, by all means, you can share this with somebody. You can share it with people that you go to AA with, or maybe one of your sponsees, somebody that's struggling with the third step, because there's so many of them. I think that going through this part makes it very accessible. And if you have any hang-ups and you're not willing to get on your knees, or you're not ready to do all that stuff, by all means, go back a couple episodes and work your way back up to it again. That's okay. You don't have to force yourself through this. There's no perfect way to do it, and there's no timetable here. As long as you're moving and you're chipping away at your program, you're moving. You will be moving forward, even if you have to step back a ways. So just keep at it, keep chipping away at it, and I assure you, your life will improve. And so this was a pleasure. It was a great pleasure. Unfortunately, though, that was just the third step. We still have 9 more to go. So don't by all means enjoy the warmth and the hug and the release and the relief that comes from doing a third step. For a moment, and appreciate this moment, the fresh air. But don't hang out in it too long, because we got to get right back to work, and that's what the fourth step's about. And so in the next the next episode, we will start going over your 4-step. So really looking forward to it. I hope this helped you guys. God bless you, and I'll see you in the next episode.